Good morning, scholars. Today we're going to be reviewing the French and Indian War. It's the first war that we're going to be reviewing. For today's objective, scholars will be able to explain how the consequences of the French and Indian War led to the American Revolution by successfully answering your exit ticket. So for today's knowledge, we're going to review Resolution, the Virginia Stamp Act, Parliament, Sugar Act, Stamp Act, which is the same thing as the Virginia Stamp Act, Townshend Acts, Mercantilist, Boycotts, Quartering Act, and Quartering Acts. Not all of those are going to be super relevant to today's lesson, but they're still involving the same information. So for your do now, you are going to answer the question, what does it mean for two foreign countries to fight a war over colonial territory? And how is that different from them fighting war over their own territory? You're going to have 5 minutes to answer this question in an open-ended format. Then you're going to look at a map and you're going to predict what would occur if Great Britain tried to expand to the west. What would the impact on the French and Native Americans be living there would be? What would be the impact of the French and Native Americans living there? That's what I was trying to say. You're going to answer that in an open-ended format. And then you're going to watch a quick 3-minute video describing the French and Indian War. So, basically, the French and Indian War started because the British and the French both wanted to expand. And so they both wanted to expand in a similar direction. So when they both got there, they were upset that each of them wanted to expand in that same direction. So the reason why the British wanted to expand was because they wanted access to the Ohio River Valley. This Ohio River Valley then gave them access to the Mississippi River. And France didn't want this to happen. So France got a ton of Native American tribes to go onto his side. So he had over 14 different they had over 14 different Native American tribes on the French side. Whereas Britain only was able to get one Native American tribe. So most of the Native American tribes were with the French and they were all fighting to keep their land. If you look at the map, you can see that the French owned all of the land that was west of the colonies. Now, George Washington comes into play because he is a colonel in Virginia. Virginia is part of the British colonies, and the British colonies start noticing that the French are trying to fight with them. So they send George Washington out to protect one of their forts. They have a lot of forts. We're going to talk more about their forts, but they send him out to protect the forts because he's a colonel. And on his way there, he actually runs into the French, and the French are attacking the fort that he was supposed to protect. So they go into war, and this is the start of the French and Indian War. This is the first battle fought. So at first, the French were winning by a landslide. They had a ton more people. Remember, they had like 14 different tribes with them. And on top of that, they had a lot of ammunition. They had a lot of weapons. And so they were winning by a landslide until William Pitt came around. William Pitt was part of the British side. I keep going like this, or I keep moving my hand this way because the British was on this side. So William Pitt starts noticing that they're losing, and he's like, okay, I need to figure out a way to solve this. So he gets a loan for a lot of money, and with this money, the British use it to beef up their game, basically. They get a bunch of guns, a bunch of ammunition, a bunch of like archery. They just get a lot of weapons to protect themselves. And they're able to also get a few more people to join the British side. So eventually, the British win. They end up beating the French. And so the war ends with the Treaty of Paris. And shortly after that, the Proclamation of 1763 is born. So after you watch that video discussing what I just said in basically a video form, you're going to answer 3 different questions, and you're going to use steps to answer these questions. The first question is, Which European power had the largest number of colonists living in North America? You're going to do step 1, which is read the question and ask yourself what important acts are mentioned. Step 2, ask yourself, what do you know about the act? And step 3, you're going to answer the question, find the evidence, and explain how it connects. Then you're going to answer 2 more questions. Then you're going to look at a map of before and after. And pay attention to the pink part because that was British land. The green part was French land. Now, the Proclamation of 1763 came about after the war. So the British were already super in debt because William Pitt spent all this money on them basically winning the war. So they owe a ton of money to a bunch of different countries that lent them money. So they didn't want any more problems with anyone else. They didn't want to owe money to more people. And they saw that there were a lot of Native Americans west in the land that they just won. So in order to keep the peace, in order to make sure that there wasn't any further issues, they set up the Proclamation of 1763. This was a border that was down the Appalachian Mountains, and this basically forbade anybody from the colonies into going west, moving west of the Appalachian Mountains. It forbade them from doing that because they wanted to keep peace with the Native Americans. So because they were in debt and they owed a lot of countries different money, or a lot of different countries money, British Parliament, so the British government decided that they were going to add a lot of tax laws to the colonists alone. It wasn't to Europe, it was just to the colonists. They were like, well, we used all this money so we could help you guys, so now you guys are gonna have to pay us back. So they started taxing a bunch of different things. They started taxing paper, they started taxing sugar, they started taxing, paper, sugar, and I'm missing one, tea. Paper, sugar, and tea. So what I mean by that is pretend that before tea is really, really popular in the colonies and it's really popular in Europe as well. So pretend that before tea was $1 because that's how much it costs to import the tea. Well, now it's $5. And people were really upset because they were having to pay more for things that they didn't usually have to pay as much for. And the Stamp Act is actually really important because the Stamp Act basically was an act that that they added to everything that was made out of paper. So absolutely anything that was made out of paper was taxed. So like whether that was that were like books or like contracts or anything that was made out of paper was beginning to be taxed. And on top of that, anything that they needed to create from paper had to come from England. So they had to purchase it from England. So let's say that before they used to purchase paper from China because it's $10 a box, I don't know. Now they had to purchase it from England where it was $50 a box. This was one of the acts that they were implementing into the colonies. So you are going to choose from mild, medium, and spicy prompts and talk about how the colonists viewed the Stamp Act and why it made them upset. Make sure you answer in complete sentences. All right, and then you are going to look into Native American perspective. So if you were a Native American during this time, how would you feel about the war? Would you feel like you won the war because you were on the British side, or would you feel like you were defeated because you were on the French side? Would it make you feel upset that two countries that do not own the land are fighting for the land that is practically yours and not theirs? So you're going to talk about that in the end of today's lesson, and your exit ticket will be on Teams. If you guys have absolutely any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, I will see you guys soon. Bye, guys.